Lauren smirked as she packed her suitcase, carefully folding each designer dress and placing them neatly inside. The soft hum of jazz played from the speaker on her vanity, blending with the faint sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She moved with an air of practiced confidence, the kind that came from years of deception without consequence. "I'll be back Sunday," she said lightly, tossing a casual glance over her shoulder. Marcus sat in his usual spot at the dining table, a glass of whiskey resting in his palm, his fingers tapped absently against the crystal, his expression unreadable. He looked up at her, his gaze lingering just long enough for her to assume he was merely indulging her, as he always did. "I know," he said simply, taking a slow sip. "Enjoy your trip." Lauren smiled, convinced that she had him wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger. She didn't bother with unnecessary explanations. There was no need. He never questioned her before, and why would he start now? As she rolled her suitcase to the door, Marcus watched her carefully. He had memorized every little detail of this moment, the way she adjusted the strap of her expensive purse, the way she checked her reflection in the mirror one last time, and the way she barely looked back as she walked out. She had mastered the art of deceit. But what she failed to realize was that she wasn't the only one playing a game. The door clicked shut behind her. Marcus exhaled slowly, setting his drink down with deliberate care. He wasn't angry, not anymore. Anger was reactive. He preferred strategy. His mind was already 10 steps ahead of her, weaving a silent, calculated destruction that she would never see coming. He rose from his chair and walked toward the study, where his laptop sat open on the desk. A legal document glowed on the screen. His divorce papers. Already filed, already signed. All that was left was for Lauren to receive them, and she would. At the precise moment when it would devastate her the most, his phone buzzed. A message from the bank. All joint accounts successfully frozen. A second message followed. The house deed has been transferred to your name. Marcus leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a rare smirk. While Lauren basked in her little fantasy, Marcus had been meticulously dismantling the foundation of her life. Every credit card was already declined. Every resource she had so smugly relied on had been cut off. By the time she landed at her so-called business conference, she would find herself stranded without access to the wealth she had taken for granted. But the real masterpiece of his revenge would be waiting for her when she returned. An empty house. No furniture, no belongings, no trace that she had ever belonged here. She thought she had outplayed him. She had no idea she was walking straight into her own downfall. Marcus moved through the house with measured steps, the weight of finality settling over him like a second skin. The silence was different now. No longer the quiet of ignorance, but the calm before the storm. He poured himself another drink, savoring the smoky burn as he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Lauren had spent years treating their marriage like a convenience, something she could manipulate as she pleased. She had assumed that because Marcus never reacted in the moment, he never noticed. That because he didn't raise his voice or make accusations, he was weak. What she failed to understand was that silence was his greatest weapon. He didn't believe in messy confrontations or fleeting bursts of rage. No, Marcus believed in something far more devastating: precision. And so, while she had been playing her games, he had been planning her destruction. With one final glance around the home that was about to become nothing more than an empty shell, Marcus walked into his office. His laptop was still open, displaying all the necessary documents. The divorce papers had been filed, but that was only the beginning. He navigated to his email, opening a thread he had carefully cultivated over the last few weeks. Every message was a quiet strike, a well-calculated move leading to Lauren's inevitable downfall. He had reached out to the landlord of the luxury apartment she had secretly rented under the guise of work trips, of course, and ensured that her lease was revoked due to non-payment. He had spoken to her credit card providers, informing them of potential fraudulent activity, prompting a full investigation that would leave her accounts locked indefinitely. Lauren's entire safety net was disappearing thread by thread. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. All remaining funds transferred, credit lines closed, car repossession in progress. Marcus exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. It was almost poetic, really. Lauren had spent so much time weaving lies, thinking she was the puppeteer, never realizing she was the puppet. And now, with one calculated pull of the strings, he was cutting her loose. The final touch was the house. Their home, his home. While Lauren was blissfully unaware, Marcus had taken full ownership of the property. Every single piece of furniture, every photograph, every trace of her presence was being removed. By the time she returned, expecting to step back into her comfortable life, she would find nothing but emptiness. She had left a husband behind. She would return to find a stranger, one who owed her nothing. He checked his watch. The moving company would arrive soon. Everything she had ever claimed as hers would be gone by the end of the day. And as for her lover, Brandon had already abandoned ship. Marcus had made sure of that. It hadn't been difficult. A few strategically leaked photos, some damning evidence sent to Brandon's wife, because of course a man like Brandon would be just as dishonest in his own marriage. The fallout had been immediate. Brandon had cut off all contact with Lauren, blocked her number, wiped his hands clean before the flames could reach him. Lauren had risked everything for a man who had discarded her the moment it became inconvenient. And Marcus, he would be watching from a distance as it all unraveled. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Right on time, the movers filed in, swift and professional, dismantling years of shared life with practiced efficiency. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms crossed as they stripped the house bare. The bed where she had once slept soundly, believing she was untouchable, was gone. The closet full of designer clothes she had paraded around in, emptied. Even the kitchen, where she had laughed and poured wine while lying through her teeth, was cleared of everything she had ever touched. By the time they finished, the house was unrecognizable. Marcus ran a hand over the cold marble of the kitchen counter, taking one last look before heading toward the front door. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the ring he had once placed on Lauren's finger with unwavering faith. He set it down on the bare counter, a final goodbye. When she returned, expecting a warm homecoming, expecting the security of the life she had built on lies, she would find nothing but silence. No house, no money, no husband. Just an empty space where everything she had taken for granted used to be. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. She had played her game. Now it was over. Lauren's heels clicked against the polished airport floor as she strolled toward baggage claim, her phone in one hand and her sunglasses in the other. The business trip had been a success. At least that was what she told herself. In reality, it had been an escape, a thrilling rendezvous wrapped in the excuse of professional obligations. Brandon had been charming as ever, wining and dining her in lavish hotel suites, whispering sweet nothings between stolen kisses. He made her feel alive, desired in a way Marcus never could, or so she believed. Yet something was off. Brandon had grown distant toward the end, checking his phone more than usual, avoiding direct eye contact. The last night had been particularly strange. He had insisted he had urgent work in the morning, cutting their final evening together short. When she reached for his hand, he barely held it. When she kissed him goodbye at the airport, he barely reciprocated. Lauren dismissed it as paranoia. Maybe he was just stressed. Maybe he was just being cautious. But now, as she scrolled through her messages while waiting for her luggage, unease crept into her bones. No messages from Brandon, no messages from Marcus either. Usually there was at least some routine communication, a simple "how was your flight" or a passive-aggressive "busy trip." Marcus had never been particularly expressive, but he had always maintained an air of obligation. Not this time. Lauren frowned, stepping outside into the crisp evening air. She hailed a cab, slipping into the back seat with a sigh. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe she was just exhausted. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Flawless, poised, and untouchable. Whatever was nagging at her would disappear the moment she stepped into her home, into the comfortable life she had so expertly curated. Or so she thought. The cab pulled up in front of the house, and Lauren's stomach lurched before she could even process why. The lights were off, the driveway was empty, the front porch, usually adorned with fresh flowers, was bare. Something was wrong. She stepped out cautiously, pulling her suitcase behind her, her fingers tightening around the handle. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the doorknob and turned it. Unlocked. Lauren pushed the door open, expecting the familiar scent of home, the warm glow of ambient lighting. Instead, she was met with nothing. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. The air felt hollow, as if the very essence of the house had been stripped away. Her heels echoed against the hardwood floor. Everything was gone. The furniture, the artwork, the Persian rug in the living room, the grand piano she had never played but insisted on keeping. The chandelier still hung from the ceiling, but beneath it, there was nothing. Lauren's suitcase toppled over as she staggered forward. Her fingers fumbled for her phone, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. She called Marcus, but the call went straight to voicemail. She turned toward the kitchen, desperate for something, anything that would ground her, that would assure her this was just some bizarre misunderstanding. But the kitchen was bare too. The cabinets hung open, exposing empty shelves. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but the cold glow of the interior light. The wine rack, once filled with bottles of imported red, was stripped clean. Lauren's breath came in shallow gasps. She pressed her hands against the countertop, trying to steady herself. This wasn't possible. She darted toward the bedroom, her heels slipping on the sleek floor. The bed was gone, the nightstands were gone, the closet, her sacred sanctuary of designer dresses and luxury handbags, was gutted. Only empty hangers remained, swaying slightly, as if mocking her. Panic surged through her veins. She pulled open drawer after drawer, only to find them empty. Her jewelry, her clothes, her entire life vanished. Lauren's fingers trembled as she pulled up her banking app. She needed to check something to reassure herself that she still had control over something. Error, unable to access account, please contact your bank. Her stomach twisted violently. She tried her credit card next, declined. One by one, she checked every account, every credit line. Empty, frozen, closed. A strangled cry escaped her lips. No, this couldn't be happening. This had to be a mistake. She tried calling Marcus again, straight to voicemail. She tried texting, no response. Frantic, she called Brandon. This number is no longer in service. Lauren let out a hysterical laugh, the sound sharp and hollow in the emptiness around her. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. Marcus knew. Marcus had done this. The realization hit her like a freight train, sending her to her knees. She clutched her phone, staring at the screen as if it could somehow undo everything, as if it could somehow take her back to a time when she was untouchable, when she was in control. A single message popped up on her screen from Marcus. She hesitated, then tapped it open. Hope your trip was worth it. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the empty floor. And for the first time in her life, Lauren had nothing. Lauren remained frozen on the cold, empty floor, staring at the screen of her phone as Marcus's message burned itself into her mind. Hope your trip was worth it. The words were so simple, yet they carried the weight of everything she had lost. A slow, creeping dread slithered through her veins. This wasn't a nightmare she could wake up from. This wasn't a bad dream. It was real. She forced herself to move, her body heavy and unsteady, her hands gripping the smooth, empty floor as she pushed herself up. Her head swam as she looked around the barren room, as if searching for some hidden sign that this was all some elaborate mistake. But the house was just as lifeless as it had been moments ago. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her chest rising and falling in short, panic bursts. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, her fingers trembling as she dialed Marcus again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Marcus! She screamed into the phone, her voice raw with desperation. What the hell is going on? Where is everything? Where are my things? Where's my money? Answer me. The robotic voice repeated the same cold message. The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. Lauren let out a strangled sob, her perfectly polished world cracking apart with every passing second. Her mind raced for answers, for options, for a way out of this mess. She needed help. Brandon. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed his number again, gripping the phone so tightly it hurt. This number's no longer in service. The words echoed in her ears like a gunshot. Gone. Brandon had vanished. He had cut her off completely. Her knees buckled, and she caught herself against the edge of the bare windowsill, gripping it as if it could somehow hold her together. Think, she whispered to herself, her voice shaky and uneven. Think, Lauren. You're smart. You can fix this. What could she? Every escape route she had relied on had been ripped away in a single, silent move. Marcus had done this. He had planned it so thoroughly, so mercilessly, and she hadn't even seen it coming. The realization made her stomach turn. She had underestimated him. She had thought he was weak, oblivious, passive. She had been a fool. Her phone buzzed in her hand and hope flared in her chest for a brief second, until she saw the message. Bank notification, your accounts have been suspended due to suspected fraudulent activity. Please contact customer support for further information. Her throat closed up. This was worse than she thought. She had no money, no home, no lover. Lauren stumbled toward the front door, yanking it open. She needed to get out of here. She needed to breathe. But as she stepped outside, the reality of her situation hit her even harder. Her car was gone. Panic clawed at her chest. She hurried down the driveway, looking left and right as if expecting to see it parked somewhere nearby. But the street was empty. No car. No sign of anything that belonged to her. Her hand flew to her mouth as bile rose in her throat. Marcus had taken everything. A gust of wind blew against her skin, making her realize something she hadn't before. The temperature had dropped, and she was standing outside in nothing but a thin designer blouse and a pair of slacks she had worn on the flight home. No coat, no purse. She checked her pockets. Nothing. Her wallet had been in her bag had been inside the house, but now there was no house, no belongings, no way to pay for a hotel, a taxi, or even a meal. A deep, hollow fear settled in her bones. Lauren was stranded. She turned back toward the house, gripping the door frame as a wave of nausea rolled over her. She needed a plan. She needed someone to call. Her mind grasped for names, for anyone she could turn to, but every option that came to mind crumbled just as quickly. Her friends? No, they weren't really friends. They were social acquaintances, women who thrived on status and wealth. They would abandon her the moment they realized she had nothing left to offer. Her family? She hadn't spoken to them in years, not since she had climbed her way into the high life and deemed them unworthy of her time. There was no one. A shiver ran through her. The sun was setting, and the once proud woman who had strutted into this neighborhood, confident and untouchable, now stood on the porch of an empty house with nowhere to go. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, her phone vibrated again. Another message from Marcus. Lauren hesitated, her fingers tightening around the device before finally opening it. You wanted a double life. Now you have no life at all. Her breath left her in a choked gasp. He had erased her. She wanted to scream, to throw her phone, to do something, but there was nothing left to destroy. Marcus had already taken care of that. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto the front steps, the weight of her choices crushing her. She had thought she was untouchable. She had thought she could have it all. But Marcus had been watching, waiting, silently orchestrating her ruin. And now, as the last traces of daylight faded and the world around her turned cold, Lauren finally understood the gravity of her mistake. She wasn't the predator. She was the prey. Lauren sat on the front steps of what was once her home, the weight of her downfall pressing down on her like an unbearable force. The sky had darkened, the streetlights flickering on, casting long, empty shadows against the pavement. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, unaware that she was unraveling piece by piece. Damn. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, rereading Marcus's last message over and over. You wanted a double life. Now you have no life at all. It was final. It was brutal. It was the truth. Her perfectly constructed world had crumbled in a matter of hours, leaving her stranded, penniless, and utterly alone. A cold gust of wind whipped through the street, making her shiver. She hugged herself, her silk blouse offering no protection from the biting air. Her mind raced for solutions, for something, anything that would get her out of this mess. But no matter how many times she retraced her steps, there was no escape. Marcus had closed every door, sealed off every exit. Her accounts were frozen, her credit was destroyed, her belongings were gone, even the people she had relied on. Brandon, her so-called friends, had abandoned her without hesitation. She reached for her phone again, searching through her contacts. Who else could she call? Who would help her? She thought of Amanda, the woman she had brunch with every Sunday. But Amanda was only interested in status and wealth. The moment she found out Lauren was broke, she would disappear like the rest. Her sister? No. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Lauren had dismissed her as a failure for not chasing the same extravagant lifestyle. What would she even say? That she had thrown everything away for a man who had discarded her like trash? Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She needed to move. She couldn't just sit here like a ghost, haunting the ruins of her own life. Pushing herself up, she stumbled down the steps, her heels clicking against the pavement. She needed a plan, but she had no money, no transportation, and nowhere to go. Maybe she could go to a hotel. Wait, no. No credit card, no cash. She could take a cab. Nope. Same problem. Her legs carried her down the sidewalk, aimless and lost. The reality of her situation was settling in now, deeper than before. For the first time in years, she was powerless. No carefully crafted lie would fix this. No manipulation, no charm, no well-placed excuse. Marcus had played the game better than her, and he had won. As she walked, her phone vibrated in her hand. A single notification flashed across the screen. Finalized. Divorce decree processed. Lauren stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. It was over. Completely, legally, permanently over. Marcus wasn't just done with her financially, he was done with her in every way possible. He had cut her out of his life like a tumor, leaving no trace of her behind. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped her lips. She had always believed she was the one in control, that Marcus was weak, oblivious, a man she could manipulate, but he had been watching, waiting, setting the stage for her own destruction, and she had walked straight into his trap. Her fingers hovered over her screen. She wanted to call him one last time, to scream, to demand answers, to plead something, anything. But what could she say? She had betrayed him, and in return, he had taken everything. With shaking hands, she closed her eyes and deleted his number. It was the final cut, the last shred of her old life slipping away. She was truly alone now. No money, no security, no power. Just the cold night and the realization that she had gambled everything and lost.